Nicolas was our eldest and only son, born in 1982, followed by two younger sisters, Rebecca and Bethan. Bethan's also known as Betty. She was born with no hair, so she was called Baldy Betty. Sadly, you may have noticed that I said was. Nicolas died in July 2018 after a very long battle with encephalitis. Until September 1998, we were a pretty conventional family of five with a dog. Nicolas had completed his GCSEs and started college. Rebecca was 14 and Betty had just turned 6. Julian, Nicolas's dad, had his own consultancy company and I worked part-time as a nurse. Nicolas was a redhead. He was cheeky and mischievous as a child with an amazing, wicked sense of humour. And he was always ready with the most ridiculous joke. He found school socially difficult, but with family and friends he was sociable and a loving person. He was the person that never had a bad word to say about anybody else, but he could be riled by his sisters, most definitely. He loved martial arts and won medals for this. This ignited his passion for Buddhism, Tai Chi and meditation in later life. He adored animals and life itself. Nicolas loved melodrama. He was always the dramatic of the three children, and he wanted to be a paramedic. And he loved cinemas and had quite a wealth of knowledge about cinemas. On September 16th, 1998, our world and our family life changed forever. Nicolas's illness presented itself with status epilepticus. This is defined as a prolonged seizure of more than 5 minutes or convulsions one after another with no recovery time. Nicolas was at college that day and I was phoned at home to attend the hospital where I actually worked. Nicolas was sedated, ventilated and moved to intensive care. We had a working diagnosis of encephalitis within a few hours, although other rare disorders had to be excluded. Nicolas's diagnosis was viral encephalitis, but this was probably a misdiagnosis and was more likely to have been an autoimmune encephalitis of unknown origin. Nicolas had periods of being well, followed by long periods of mental instabilities, hence the reason to question the diagnosis. We don't attach any blame to the two wonderful neurologists that cared for him for 20 years. Nicolas was left with brain damage to both the frontal and temporal lobes of his brain due to the prolonged seizure and the brain inflammation. He had to learn to walk, talk, read, eat, and basically live all over again. Nicolas's mental age never recovered and he became the perpetual teenager in both his thoughts and actions. The damage was very severe. Nicolas had several episodes of severe psychiatric illness, epilepsy, chronic migraine, high blood pressure, hyperthyroidism, learning difficulties, which included poor memory, word finding difficulties, poor concentration and comprehension. In later years, he was also a diabetic. He had cataracts, tinnitus, partial deafness, poor mobility, chronic pain, and then subsequently quite severe problems with his liver and pancreas. Every part of his body was affected. The physical problems seemed to exacerbate his ongoing mental health issues with all that he had to cope with. Excuse me, I'm going to blow my nose. Encephalitis robbed him of the normal pathway of life, ravaging his mind and his body. And there is no doubt that for Nicolas, life was a struggle, as he remembered actually how well he was before encephalitis, with his whole life ahead of him. Nicolas required at times constant reminders to achieve basic day-to-day living activities. His sense of humour would come through with a wry smile, which he reserved for me when I was trying to remind him to do something, as if to say, "Mummy, I know that." Not that this usually resulted in him in achieving whatever task or goal I had requested. I knew my way around the NHS. I worked as a midwife and a nurse for all my working life, and I was able to secure services for Nicolas, like physiotherapy, occupational therapy, fast-track appointments. Invaluable skills, but sadly this puts others at a disadvantage. It seemed at times an endless battle of hospital appointments followed by specialist appointments for one problem, and then another would surface and the merry-go-round would start again. I fought for 6 years to get Nicolas a social worker, but was told he wasn't ill enough. He was eventually allocated a community disabilities nurse who was wonderful. In 2009, a house and a county move meant Julian was able to secure Nicolas a social worker, and this took some pressure off us. The emotional trauma of an ongoing illness is impossible to quantify, but it's taken its toll on our whole family. Betty, our youngest, who is now 30, said recently, "I had to be the good child because of Nicolas's illness and behaviour. This is heartbreaking for a mother to hear." Encephalitis had a profound effect on every part of Nicolas and our family life, as he required 24-hour care and supervision for 20 years, whether that be from us or from professional care staff. Nicolas was eventually put into care 6 years before he died due to some behavioural issues and our utter exhaustion. Even then, we saw Nicolas every 2 to 3 days and received phone calls from care staff most week requiring our additional input. My husband and I were both very lucky to have stable careers because, as anybody knows, with a long-term illness, finances can be impacted. During Nicolas's prolonged illness, I retrained as a midwife, undertook a degree, then undertook a master's and published my research. Looking back, it was probably fairly foolish, but it kept me sane and it gave me an outside focal point. The Department for Work and Pensions does provide financial support, but it's always overly complicated and most definitely tedious. A long illness and its subsequent disabilities is a form of grief. You grieve for what might have been and the times that you've been unable to devote to the other children due to Nicolas's needs, so you juggle and try to maintain family life. There were highlights. Nicolas had infrequent and short periods of reasonable health. He actually passed his automatic car test and motorbike test the first time, and during well periods would often go motorbiking with his father. The downside being that this was often followed by days in bed as his brain needed to recover from the exertion and the concentration. When Nicolas was relatively well, and I say that in inverted commas, we twice went to Florida Disney World. Those memories are so precious, and we were able to experience what normal families experience and look back at the memories and the photographs that we have. We managed short breaks in Devon, Dorset, France and Amsterdam over the 20 years too. We know that Nicolas dearly loved his sisters and was proud of their achievements and their ability to live life to the full, albeit a tad jealous as he too would have liked to have had the same opportunities. Nicolas's best friend from school days, also called Nicolas, was a great support to him over the 20 years, remaining in constant contact by phone and in person. During one of Nicolas's well periods, they actually managed a holiday to Iceland together, and they would also spend time in London at Ronnie Scott's and at the Camden Market. Nicolas's death was always anticipated. My colleagues told me the first day that it was unlikely that he would make it through the night. We spent many nights over the following 20 years not knowing what the morning would bring. Whilst we knew and talked about the fact that Nicolas's life would be shortened, we didn't expect it the day it happened. Nicolas just went to sleep and died. Nicolas had chosen during a particular difficult period of illness to write a DNR, which is called a Do Not Resuscitate document. That was entirely his choice. And he'd also written a will. There is no doubt that Nicolas was hugely loved by so many people, and this was reflected and acknowledged by the enormous amount of people who attended his funeral. Nicolas was seen as caring, kind, warm, compassionate, generous, and a gentle person with a heart of gold, and who never judged. He also gave the most fantastic cuddles. These are not just our words and thoughts. They came from the dozens of people who knew and cared for Nicolas over his lifetime. Care staff, social workers, his consultant neurologist who actually phoned us up at home to express his sadness at Nick's death, friends of his from the snooker club and the pub. Despite his extensive disabilities, Nicolas didn't want to be seen as different. He wanted to be part of family life and events. He delighted at being an uncle, and the children's non-judgmental attitude to him made it better for him. Okay, this is the bit I get stuck up, so apologies. The death of your own child is the wrong order. Despite being an adult in the numerical sense, Nicolas was a child that required the intensive input of a child. We were and remain a family of 5. But Nicolas is missing, and there is a part of my heart that feels like it's missing. A hole that is irreplaceable and changes in size depending on my resilience. It feels like a physical pain. The concept that we're a physical family of 4, not 5 anymore, is really difficult because my other daughter has 3 children herself, and so she is a family of 5. Our youngest daughter, Betty, described her grief as a water-filled balloon that you need to prick with a pin, but dare not as the consequences are too great. Nicolas's death has upset the normal rhythm of life, and the effects are far-reaching. We have had continual support from our friends and family, for which we are blessed. We have to find a new normal way of living in whatever form that takes. Nicolas is and remains our only son, but he's no longer a physical part of our lives, but he's always in the forefront of my thoughts. Our lives are moving forward. Nicolas's death has given my husband and I our freedom back. How do you rationalise this in your brain? We can plan events and holidays knowing that they will happen, as opposed to being modified or cancelled due to Nicolas being unwell. Our lives are no longer littered with medical appointments, prescriptions to fill, and medications to be changed. Rebecca announced on Nicolas's birthday, the first one after his death, that she was going to run the Great South Run for the Encephalitis Society. She'd run a half marathon before. It snowballed, with other people wishing to take part. Nicolas's father, both our girls, aunts, cousins, godmothers and friends. I decided not to run. So I wrote a blog in the 6-month run-up and afterwards for the Encephalitis Society and took photographs for the Connect magazine. We raised £8,000 in total. And after the run, more family and friends joined us for a celebratory lunch. I've written articles about Nicolas and encephalitis and had these published within women's magazines to raise awareness. I'm now an information volunteer for the Encephalitis Society, which entails proofreading articles and online resources. I started open water swimming in April 2021 as I'd heard so much about the mental health benefits of cold water. I swam all through last winter and completed a winter challenge of 30 swims, and yesterday I foolishly signed up for this winter too. The mental health benefits cannot be underestimated. I have often cried the whole 12 miles to the beach, but the swimming and the camaraderie is always uplifting and supportive. And sadly, amongst the women I swim with, there are others who have experienced the death of their children, both as children and as adults. Advice. My advice is to think about creating stock answers to inevitable questions that primarily women face. The main one, how many children do you have? My answer often depends on the circumstances, which are who is asking and how am I feeling that day. Also, you have to be aware of the responses of others from what may seem an innocent question. On a brave day, I say 3, but my son died. On a difficult day, I say 2 girls and then add in 3 grandchildren. This answer is a self-defensive answer. I'm not denying Nicolas' existence, but I'm protecting myself and sometimes others too. The pain of grief never changes or gets better. What happens is that you learn to deal with your response to it. I gave in, my words, and accepted grief counselling earlier this year. So Nicolas now takes up the same headspace as my daughters on a day-to-day basis. For anybody out there, please reach out to the Encephalitis Society and don't be afraid to ask professionals for a second opinion or a third opinion. Encephalitis is rare. Most professionals will not have come across it. My whole family and friends are doctors, nurses and midwives. None of us have ever cared for anybody before Nicolas or subsequently with encephalitis. Thank you for listening.